YouTube, what's going on? HeirofCarthage here, and I wanted to get back into some videos that I made a while ago, but kind of want to do some more focus on, which is let's focus in on some of the units of Total War, and today we're going to be looking at Fimir Warriors in Total War Warhammer 2. What are they good at? What are they weak to? How should you use them? Alright, so as I mentioned, we are going to jump into all the upsides and downsides of Fimir Warriors with great weapons. This is a unit that I see Norska used a lot, and there's a lot of focus on mammoths. More recently, I've seen more players using Fimir Warriors, and that's probably a good thing. They are a really good unit, and they have some incredible strengths. They do have some weaknesses. But if they're a unit that you don't prepare for, they can eat you alive in a battle because they have a really interesting combination of characteristics. Let's run through those and kind of talk about Fimir Warriors real quick, and then I'm using a really cool mod, which I'll go film a couple of snapshots off so you all can check it out for yourself. I'm using a mod that allows me to pick any unit for the Lord, and then it even has some special test maps. I'm going to be using this one right here called the Pit for a lot of the testing, or sometimes this field map when I need a little more space. But basically it's a combination of two mods made by the same user that allows you to actually do good unit testing with the AI. So it's really cool. The Pit is a really interesting one. Anyway, Fimir Warriors with great weapons. Let's talk through the basics. You have 12 units. They are a large entity. So if an enemy has anti-large, then yes, it's going to count against the Fimir Warriors. They are a monstrous infantry unit, which means you're going to get a big unit with lots of mass, but it won't be as fast as, say, like a monstrous cavalry or just a cavalry unit. So their speed is going to come in at 45. Armor is a staggering 110. That is very high. Yes, there are a few units in the game with higher armor, but that is amongst some of the highest. Leadership at 60 is kind of okay. It's not bad. Here's where it gets interesting. Melee attack, 31. Not a very high stat, but they have magic attacks and sundered armor. So anytime they land a hit for 10 seconds, the enemy they hit is going to lose 30 armor. That is a big deal. It is a very big deal. The more armor that takes off, the more damage these guys can do, and the more vulnerable it makes the enemy they're attacking. And then this right here, magical attacks, means that if anything has physical resistance, they ignore it. They cut straight through it. However, it does also create a downside, like with dwarves. They all have like 25% magic resistance, and then of course a rune lord on an anvil can add even more magic resistance to things around. So yeah, magic attacks do have a downside against something like dwarves, but for the most part, going to be a pretty useful characteristic. It also means they are really good at spanking ethereal units. So it makes them very interesting. Now, melee defense is 39. It's okay. It's not great. They don't have a ton of melee defense because they're holding a giant concrete lamppost that they're going to beat your face in with. So weapon strength, again, here's another interesting stat. So there are 12 units. There's a 95 weapon strength. That's a pretty hard hit. It's not the biggest in the game for something similar, but it's pretty hard. By comparison, a Demigryph Knight with a halberd has like 50-something. Now, there are 24, or no, hang on, maybe it's 36 Demigryph Knights in this unit size, I gotta remember. Just trying to make a quick comparison here, Knights with halberds, yeah, 24, and they have 52, just to give you a comparison point. So it's pretty much right on par for what it should be. And so 27 bonus versus large in that melee attack, so that's pretty significant. Again, that's right on par with stuff like Demigryph Knights with halberds. 64 armor piercing damage and 31 base damage. So that is very significant damage that comes off of these. They're going to be very good against large unit entities. And again, that can be seen when you have a unit card and you see this characteristic on right there, entity and unit size. This is a unit of large entities. So that's what the bonus versus large applies to. Now, it is a 35 charge bonus, nothing too spectacular, but not bad. You know, it gives them a decent boost. It does cause fear, and what that means is that basically when they get into combat, it frightens enemy units, which means their morale drops when fighting the Fimir Warriors. That does not, it's not the same as Terror, but it is good if you get them around low leadership units, especially late in a battle. Their other ability here is From the Mist. It's a constant ward save that gives them 22% missile resistance as long as their leadership is above half. So that's a big deal also, because missile resistance is going to be nice for them since they don't have a shield. So it kind of gives them a shield whenever their leadership is high. Anyway, that's the basic stats behind Fimir Warriors. They are a solid unit. I mean a solid unit. There's a lot of interesting ways to use them. Let's jump into some unit test scenarios and see how they pan out in battle. Alright, here we are. Welcome to the pit. And let's get ready to rumble. Okay, no. But seriously, this is kind of what this is here. So this is the unit testing mod. This is the pit. You can see it's actually fenced in right here. It's a very small map that allows you to pit two units, 1-to-1, head-to-head. I've got the AI unit here as a Grail Knights with halberds, and they are set to attacker. And then I've got my unit of Fimir Warriors, and we're going to go head-to-head to see how these guys square up. And I wanted Grail Knights with halberds as the first test because Grail Knights with halberds set the standard when it comes to anti-large units. They're kind of like the go-to standard for most people. You can see there the Fimir Warriors did really good right off the charge, and then the Grail Knights start stacking up a lot of damage. But let's see. Let you guys watch this play out real quick. It's not going to take terribly long for this fight. Just kind of let you see how it unfolds. As the fight drags on, the Grail Knights do inflict a lot of damage. They did not do great off the charge. But the Fimir Warriors are going to win a fairly clean victory here of the Grail Knights. It won't be super easy. Bear in mind a few things, that these tests are just pitting unit versus unit. And this one could probably swing either way. If you're in a real battle, the Empire does have access to healing. Norska does not. But Norska also has access to poison warhounds and stuff. The Empire doesn't have that kind of thing. So there's a lot of factors that can be at play. Other units may be in the fight. Again, I'm just using this almost like a benchmark on the Fimir Warriors. So here, in a head-to-head, they are strong enough to defeat a Grail Knight. That Armor Sunder makes a big difference. Okay, we saw him perform against Grail Knights with halberds. How do they match up against Minotaurs with great weapons? Now remember, the Grail Knights with halberds actually cost about 50 more. The Minotaurs with great weapons cost 150 more. Check out that one Minotaur flying in the background. Let's hit play and see how this one matches up. So this is a slightly different matchup. This is large monstrous infantry against large monstrous infantry, where the other one was monstrous infantry against monstrous cavalry. These are equal number of unit models. The Minotaurs here have a harder hit. Slightly more melee attack, less defense, and more charge bonus. You can see that the fight stays pretty even early on. The Minotaurs with great weapons, though, definitely holding an advantage here. Again, 150 price difference. The Minotaurs with great weapons don't have much armor to begin with, so when the Fimir Warriors sunder it, it didn't really make a huge difference. But they were hitting so much harder in return, they just were able to defeat the Fimir Warriors fairly convincing there in terms of the fact that they beat them and routed them and had enough of their health left that the 150 cost difference wasn't a big deal there. So there you go. Gives you an idea how they compared against Demigryphs. That's how they compared against Minotaurs with great weapons. Let's take a look at some other interesting scenarios. All right, what about a Star Dragon? The Star Dragon just dropped a breath attack on me too. It's going to get the charge because it's a flying unit. Can the Fimir Warriors with great weapons turn around to fight against the Star Dragon? I'll let you all be able to see the health bars there for the two units. I won't take them off the screen, but I'll try and get a cool angle for you to watch the fight and kind of watch how it unfolds. Now, the Star Dragon cost a lot. This is like a 2,400 gold unit. And the Fimir Warriors with great weapons are 1,350. Now, granted, the dragon could escape at any time it wants to here. It's just continuing to fight. So this would represent more of a scenario where you're able to pin the dragon on the ground, probably using something like a poison warhound. Do the Fimir Warriors have enough oomph to knock it out, or will they get KO'd by the dragon, who also deals massive armor-piercing damage? Well, think about it. The dragon is a single unit entity. It is big, it is powerful, it can fly. Its biggest advantage is going to be the fact that it can charge the Fimir Warriors without taking a charge in return. It can use breath attacks, it can retreat. If you leave it in a fight with multiple unit models like these Fimir Warriors, so many of the Fimir Warriors are going to be able to land hits on the dragon that they can win a fight where just by money they're outclassed. Now, again, this is if the dragon stays on the ground. I'm just using this as an example to show you just how hard the Fimir Warriors can hit when given the opportunity. Obviously, a lot of players probably not going to make it real easy for you to just grab their dragon on the ground, but it gives you some ideas. What if I want to use some Fimir Warriors? Well, maybe I'll pair them with some knights with, or some hounds with poison to help keep something on the ground. That would make it very hard for a dragon to get back in the air and to get away from the Fimir Warriors. So, again, this is just to give you some kind of benchmark info here. So very, very potent against large targets, just as you would think, because, I mean, that's what it looks like they're good for. This test was just meant to be something kind of fun and interesting. I wanted to put them up against the Knights of the Ebon Claw. These guys aren't dedicated anti-large. There's 36 units models. They have decent charge, a lot of armor, a shield, and pretty good armor-piercing characteristics. And I was like, I'm curious how they stack up against the Fimir Warriors. So let's hit play and watch. Knights of the Ebon Claw cost quite a bit more than the Fimir Warriors. I think it's 150 or 200 more gold. And this is one of those things where maybe you're playing Dark Elves, maybe you're going up against Norska. You see a Fimir Warrior, you've got something like the Knights of the Ebon Claw, and you think, oh, I can charge that unit. I've got a nice armor-piercing cavalry. We can take them out. No, you won't. No, you won't. Without that bonus versus large, and then the fact that their armor's getting sundered, the Fimir Warriors just kick the living crap out of Knights of the Ebon Claw. Not a huge surprise. Knights of the Ebon Claw are really probably more of an anti-infantry weapon. They can be used as anti-large in certain scenarios, but what you see here, not really their token, especially against a dedicated anti-large infantry like these Fimir Warriors. So very interesting indeed. Let's take a look at some more test scenarios. The next test that I wanted to just kind of show you all here, so we saw them tested against Demigryphs, against the Knights of the Ebon Claw. They did very well against both. What about Grail Knights? 1,500 cost cavalry. Grail Knights will be somewhat vulnerable to the Fimir Warriors because they have a 20% ward save that gives, or physical resistance that comes from a constant save of theirs. Fimir Warriors have magic attacks. They have armor sundering. And even with a massive 106 charge while in the diamond formation, Grail Knights just get absolutely owned. So that's 3 different cavalry units that get owned. Even one that is dedicated anti-large, anti-armor, which is the Demigryph Knights. So kind of what I'm thinking from this is the main use for Fimir Warriors is going to be for destroying enemy heavy cavalry. That's where they're going to have their main shining moment, and they do it very well. They do it very well at a good cost trade. Let's check some other scenarios. How do they stack up against certain lords? We saw them go against that Star Dragon, right, too? Also, how do they stack up against infantry? What kind of spells are they vulnerable to? What kind of skirmishers are they vulnerable to? Artillery. Let's go take a look. All right, so the first test here is going to be Tyrion. Why Tyrion? Well, he's really tanky. He has the ability to heal up a bunch of hit points at the end. He's got special abilities you can see here that are giving him insane attack, defense, and other stats. He's an absolute tank. How can he handle these Fimir Warriors? Well, once again, the interesting thing about Fimir Warriors going up against lords is that a lord is a single unit entity. The Fimir Warriors are 12. And here, even without surrounding Tyrion, I've got, it looks like 5 or 6 Fimir Warriors in the act of attacking him. So that's 5 or 6 units with 95, damage. Tyrion has 470. He's trying to bury all of that into one unit at a time, though. I don't believe he gets splash damage. Maybe he does. But you can see he hasn't even killed a unit model yet. Whereas Tyrion is taking a beating in return. And again, I haven't even moved to surround him. All this is in a fight where, let's assume your player leaves him in here with the Fimir Warriors, which they may not. But, like, what if Tyrion charged in and managed to get surrounded? So I'm going to recreate that right now. I moved him forward slightly. Now I have even more unit models attacking Tyrion. So this is where Fimir Warriors are going to get really dangerous to an enemy lord, is where you have them in multiples just dishing the damage. And look how quickly Tyrion gets battered. You can't quite see him up there, but I'll move it up so you guys can watch the health bar. And again, remember, Tyrion is a very tanky character here. Most lords couldn't sit here and take this kind of beating. In fact, they end up beating him up so bad here at the end that even when his Heart of Avalorn ability goes off there, it's too late. He just loses his leadership. They just start knocking it out of him. So Fimir Warriors could be a good way to deal with Lords, both in campaign and in multiplayer. It'd be a little easier in campaign, but you can see there that if they can surround a single unit entity like a Lord, especially one that's large, which is why I picked Tyrion, I mean, they can beat the living daylights out of him. They didn't even lose a unit model. And again, Tyrion's pretty tough. Well, what about a dedicated anti-large Lord like Kolek? Does it still work out as good? Let's go look. So KOing Tyrion is very cost-effective for the Fimir Warriors. Well, what if they could take out Kolek? Well, that would be even more cost-effective because he costs a lot more. So I threw Kolek in here, gave him a couple of his special abilities like Star Crusher, gave him his lightning. I don't know if he'll end up using it because he's AI controlled. Yeah, so Fimir Warriors do know their limits. And this is one of their limits. Kolek Sun Eater is just a bigger, badder anti-large unit, and he kicks the crap out of them. So alone, Fimir Warriors are obviously going to have their limits on where they're going to be good versus Lords. Also bear in mind there's magic that can heal, magic that can debuff, magic that can damage. So you got to consider all that when you get into an actual battle. Again, I'm just trying to show you some of the strengths and limitations of these cool Fimir Warrior units, and this is definitely one of their limitations. Of course, most of us would be limited whenever our head got caved in by a giant hammer called Star Crusher. Okay, another good scenario in my mind to test is going to be against infantry. We've seen that Fimir Warriors shine against enemy cavalry. How do they do against armored infantry? They do sunder armor. They are an anti-large unit, not an anti-infantry. But can they double? Can they double duty? So I stuck them up against a Black Orc here. Black Orc is high charge. Armor piercing damage cost 1100. The Fimir Warrior cost 1350. How does it play out? Well, let's fast forward and give you an idea. So the Fimir Warrior would need to win this and win it with enough left over to make it worth the fact that the Black Orcs are cheaper. And as you can see, that isn't going to happen. The Fimir Warriors are going to lose, and the Black Orcs are going to walk away with quite a lot of unit models left, 30 out of 60 at least at the moment, maybe slightly less when it ends. So the Black Orcs are going to handily take this away. So Fimir Warriors, maybe if they had support, could be useful against infantry because of the way they sunder and deal all that armor-piercing damage, but as just like a straight-up trade, not a trade you want to take. And this gives you an idea of one of the ways you might be able to deal with Fimir Warriors is by forcing them into a fight like this that isn't going to favor them. So 26 out of 30 Black Orcs survived there. That's not a good trade. You paid more, and there's a lot of Black Orcs left that can go on to damage other units in your infantry. Let's just test it again on another unit to be sure. So how about like Swordmasters, another high-cost anti-armor infantry. Alright, this should be very similar to Black Orcs, but I just wanted to test to be sure. Make sure there was nothing special about Black Orcs, like from a mass perspective or just anything else. So we'll stick the Swordmasters out here. Remember, they've got Martial Mastery or Martial Prowess, one of the two, I can't remember. At least Martial Prowess. Yeah, Martial Prowess. So they get extra defense and attack when their hit points are over 50%. The Swordmasters just slaughter the Fimir Warriors. So once again, driving home the point that I was making here, which is the Fimir Warriors, again, not unexpected. They are dedicated anti-large, and no, they don't double as a good infantry killer in just a one-to-one type of fight. Maybe with support, but not in just a one-to-one type of fight. All right, we've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the Fimir Warriors in terms of the units that they engage with. Let's talk about the counters and how well the different counters work. So as you can imagine, skirmishers, remember they have 22% missile resistance. Artillery, magic. Let's look at some of those counters. All right, handguns. All right, now I know most of you aren't going to park your Fimir Warriors in a pit in front of handguns and let them get shot, but I just wanted to let you see the damage with that 22% missile resistance. How effective is a unit like handgunners? Is it a viable counter in combat? Well, let's talk about it. That was 2 volleys, and you can see that you've lost probably 40% of the hit points on your Fimir Warriors, at least 30%. Yeah, a few volleys and handgunners can really damage an expensive unit like Fimir Warriors, and I think at least 2 volleys from when they step into range to trying to get to an infantry line is feasible. Now, that does mean you'd have to protect handgunners from fast-moving Norscan units like Warhounds, Ice Hounds, Beast of Tanshar, marauders, horsemen, like all kinds of stuff you'd have to protect your handgunners from. Mammoths that could plow through the line. Can your handgunners focus on a mammoth and a Fimir warrior and the other stuff coming in? It's going to be hard. Is it an effective counter? Yes. And the handguns should be able to shoot over the top of other infantry and still hit the Fimir warriors because they're tall. So I would say handgunners are definitely an effective counter, despite the 22% missile resistance. I didn't actually test just any standard bows. Could they work? Probably over time. I tested the handgunners specifically for that anti-armor. And the fact that they should be able to shoot over the top of a cheaper infantry unit to maybe work out as an effective counter. Let's check out some other counters. All right, we've left the pit and come out to the unit testing fields. Very scenic here, too. We're going to test some Dawi cannon. These are dedicated anti-armor cannons here. And I let the Fimir Warriors stand still and take the first volleys. 2 Dawi cannon is not an unusual thing to see. Now, would someone pick Fimir Warriors against Dawi when they have magic resistance? I don't know. I don't know. I just picked the Dawi cannons. They should be relatively similar to Empire cannons. The cost is relatively similar. And this is just to get a look. Can they hit units on the move? And yes, the cannons landed multiple hits here while the unit's on the move. What about when I start changing directions and moving around more? I've got a flank exposed to the cannons and my unit is split all over. Are the cannons still effective? Again, let's see. 1 unit model has already been completely killed. So from this distance, and I am well within the range of the cannons, by the way. So, I mean, the cannons can really deal with Fimir Warriors here very, very effectively. You see a couple of cannons able to very quickly knock out a unit of Fimir Warriors, even while on the move. Obviously, you probably don't want to expose your flank to the cannons like I did there, but still, the cannons are going to get a lot of shots. It's going to be very effective, probably one of the best counters, but again, you're going to have to protect them against the other Norscan units. The only benefit here is that they can hit from much longer range than a handgun. All right, this next test is going to see, is there any magic out there that's good against them? I'm only going to test 1 lore here to just kind of get you a quick feel. A very common magic pick that some people might make is Lore of Death. There are other magic spells out there, but we're going to pick Lore of Death, specifically Spirit Leech and Fate of Buna. Now, Fate of Buna is good against multiple unit models within the single unit that you cast it on, but it has limits. The lower the unit models, the less good it does. Spirit Leech, on the other hand, is meant more for like a single unit model or a very small unit model. So 1, 2, 3, units in a single, models in a single unit. We're going to try both here. First, I'm going to use Buna. I'm just having to build up the magic on my Death Shaman here. And we'll start with Buna. The Fimir Warriors are going to start at 61, 68 hit points. And we'll see how much damage Buna does. And then we'll cast a Spirit Leech and see how much it does. And then talk about whether we think the mana is worth it. It's 22 mana to cast Fate of Buna and 8 mana to cast Spirit Leech. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we expect things to fall. Let's go ahead and fast forward. We're going to hit these guys with the Buna, and we'll let it roll out here. Remember, the starting hit points, the starting hit points on the Fimir Warriors, just get the unit card pulled up here, is going to be 61, 68. So 61, 68 minus 54, 88 totals for 680 damage that we did to the Fimir Warriors for 22 mana. Not a good use of mana at all. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get Spirit Leech ready. And remember, now we're starting from 54, 88. So 54, 88 is going to be our starting point. And let's get to our finishing point. Sorry, I had a calculator in my hand. So here's our Fimir Warriors with great weapons. This is 8 mana. So let's do the math there. 5488 minus 4564. It's going to leave us with 924 damage. Let's divide that by the 8 mana. So that's 115.5 hit points per mana that you spent. Whereas the 680 for the Fate of Buna, damage-wise, divided by the 22 mana, and you only got 30.9. So if you were going to use something like Lore of Death, for instance, which is, again, a common pick that I think you see with quite a few factions, Spirit Leech is going to be more effective at bringing down Fimir Warriors because of their lower unit models, lower models per unit. So keep that in mind. Again, just trying to talk through the different counters here. All right, so if a non-anti-large armor-piercing infantry could put down a Fimir Warrior, surely a dedicated anti-large, anti-armor infantry can put down a Fimir Warrior. So I've got a halberd unit here for a quick test. I mean, being a cheaper infantry, will the Fimir Warriors slaughter them? Will they win the fight? And let's take a look. I mean, at first, the Fimir Warriors do cause ferocious damage to the halberds. Over time, obviously, it levels out, and the Fimir Warriors lose the fight. This is a good trade. This is about I think 650 for the halberds, trading against 1350. Is someone going to leave their Fimir Warriors in combat with you? Probably not. Maybe you get lucky. But again, maybe you use these halberds to back up other infantry, which means the Fimir Warriors won't be in good shape there. Maybe you use the halberds to back up your cavalry. They're a pretty expensive pick to do it, but do they win? Yes. If they win, will that mean Blackguard, Phoenix Guard, and other elite infantry that have anti-large will win? Yes, they all will. They will all win if these ones are going to win. So rather than going testing all those elite ones, what happens if I take 2 cheap non-armor piercing spears because they're the same cost as these halberds? Do they trade okay against Fimir Warriors? Could I just overload Fimir Warriors with cheap anti-large infantry? Let's check it out. All right, here we are. So 2 300 cost, no shield, regular spearmen for the Empire going against Fimir Warriors. Can they defeat them in a prolonged combat? I mean, these are pretty crap units with low leadership. Fimir Warriors cause fear, and they dish tons of damage. The spears don't have the armor piercing. Can they finish them by sheer weight of numbers? And I think you all can kind of see that the answer is going to be yes, they can. So this is another way that you might be able to deal with Fimir Warriors. Do you have a lot of dread spears? Do you have a lot of spearmen for the Empire? Men-at-arms with spears. They're all very cheap, and as you've seen, Fimir Warriors are not really great infantry killers in a standalone engagement. So this is an opportunity for you to bog them down with cheap units and keep them from being effective versus your cavalry. Mix the spearmen with your cavalry, or deflect the Fimir Warriors away from your cavalry with the infantry, because the Fimir Warriors aren't fast enough to catch them. If you have a lord you're worried about, surround them with infantry like this to keep the Fimir Warriors from being able to get the hits they need. These are going to be some of the effective ways to counter. So let's recap the strengths. Fimir Warriors, what do you use them against? Enemy cavalry and enemy lords on cavalry, and probably a few other situations. They knocked out a dragon, even letting the dragon get a breath and a charge. Will the dragon stay on the ground? No, but I'm just giving you the examples. These are the things they're good against. What are some things you should be afraid of with Fimir Warriors? Getting bogged down in infantry fights with no support. That's what you need to steer clear of if you want to use them effectively. Alright, well, what if you're the player that wants to stop Fimir Warriors? Well, armor-piercing missiles. That's going to be one way to do it. Even with their missile resistance, the armor-piercing missiles are going to get the job done. These guys are a big target, and they take a lot of damage. That can be foot skirmishers, but I think we saw that the most effective way to do it is going to be a cannon. If you are on a map that allows for good use of a cannon, they are going to be a great counter to Fimir Warriors. And we saw that certain magic can be an effective counter to the Fimir Warriors. So, Spirit Leech from the Lore of Death proved to be pretty effective for what you got out of it. A good way to drain some of the energy off of those units. So, something to be aware of as you're trying to bring these guys down and find effective ways to counter them. Yes, there's more spells out there. Yes, there's more units out there. I did this to try and give you all a good idea of what to expect from Fimir Warriors with great weapons. We can do more unit focuses. Do you guys think there's some cool units out there that don't get a lot of attention? Should we cover those units? Should we really find out the best ways to use them? Fimir Warriors with great weapons. They do get some attention. They're not completely unused. But here we were. We were able to do a little bit of studying today with some cool mods. Go check those mods out for yourself and do some unit testing for yourself. Will a unit test always help you win a battle? No, because it's a one-on-one engagement. But you get to learn something about the game and learn how the game works, and I hope this was helpful for you. HeirofCarthage, signing out. I will see you soon.